The afternoon sun in Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso, blazed with an intensity that seemed to set the very air on fire. The marketplace, a sprawling tapestry of colors, sounds, and scents, pulsed with the rhythm of daily life. Vendors called out their wares in melodic voices that rose above the general din, their hands gesturing expressively as they negotiated prices with customers who had perfected the art of bargaining over generations. The smell of grilled meat mingled with the earthy aroma of fresh vegetables and the sweet fragrance of tropical fruits piled high in wooden crates under the corrugated metal roofs that provided minimal shelter from the relentless heat. Shopkeepers fanned themselves with pieces of cardboard while continuing to smile at potential buyers. Children weaved through the crowds with the agility of small birds, some carrying goods on their heads, others simply playing games that required nothing more than imagination and the dusty ground beneath their feet. Women in vibrant boubous balanced baskets filled with goods, their movements graceful despite the weight they carried. It was in this bustling heart of the city, where life persisted despite hardship, that President Ibrahim Traoré walked quietly one afternoon. He wore simple clothes, a plain cotton shirt and trousers that bore no insignia of his office. No security detail marched ahead clearing the path. No motorcade waited at the corner. He had slipped away from the presidential palace with only his most trusted aide, seeking something that reports and briefings could never provide, the unvarnished truth of his nation's daily struggles. President Traoré believed deeply in understanding the real lives of his people. He had risen from modest circumstances himself, having served as a sergeant in the northern conflicts before political circumstances thrust him into leadership. He knew that power had a way of creating distance between leaders and the elite, building invisible walls that filtered truth until it became palatable rather than honest. Today, he wanted to see the faces that statistics reduced to numbers, the stories that remained untold in official documents. As he walked past the meat vendor's stall, where flies buzzed around hanging carcasses despite the vendor's constant efforts to shoo them away, something caught his attention. A figure sat on the bare ground, partially hidden in the shadow cast by the stall's overhang. The president's steps slowed, then stopped altogether. She was a girl of perhaps 20 years, though hardship had a way of making age difficult to determine. Her clothes, once perhaps colorful, were now faded to indeterminate shades of gray and brown, caked with the red dust that covered everything in this part of the city. Her eyes, large and dark, stared at nothing in particular with an emptiness that spoke of hunger deeper than the physical kind. In her outstretched hand, she held a small plastic cup, the universal symbol of begging. A few coins lay at the bottom, barely enough for a single meal. The president felt something stir in his memory, a feeling like the echo of a voice calling across years. He moved closer, and as he did, he noticed the girl's features more clearly. There was something familiar about the shape of her face, the set of her jaw. His breath caught in his throat as recognition dawned. "Aisha," he said softly, his voice barely audible above the market noise. The girl looked up, startled. Her eyes widened in confusion and fear, the automatic response of someone accustomed to being invisible suddenly being seen. President Traoré's mind raced backward through time, to the dusty battlefields of the northern territories where he had fought alongside brave men and women, defending their homeland from insurgents. Among those soldiers had been Sergeant Daoud, a man whose courage was matched only by his devotion to his daughter. The president remembered him clearly. A stocky man with graying hair and a laugh that could lift spirits even in the darkest moments of conflict. He remembered the day Sergeant Daoud died. They had been pinned down by enemy fire in a small village, and the sergeant had volunteered to provide cover for a civilian evacuation. A bullet had found him as he stood to lay down suppressive fire. Ibrahim had been there as life faded from his friend's eyes, had held his hand as he gasped his final words. "Promise me, Ibrahim. Promise me you'll look after my daughter. Her name is Aisha. She's all I have in this world. Promise me you'll make sure she's taken care of." Ibrahim had promised. He had meant it with every fiber of his being in that moment. But then came the chaos of the political transition, the unexpected elevation to the presidency, the overwhelming flood of responsibilities that came with leading a nation. Somehow, in the deluge of urgent matters demanding his attention, he had failed to keep that sacred promise. Until now. "Your father was Sergeant Daoud," the president said, kneeling down beside her despite the protests of his aide. The ground was hot and dirty, but he didn't care. "I served with him. I was there. I was there when he fell." Aisha's empty expression cracked. Tears welled up in her eyes and her lip trembled. For a moment she couldn't speak. Then, in a voice hoarse from disuse and emotion, she whispered, "You knew my father?" "I knew him," Ibrahim confirmed, his own eyes glistening. "He was one of the bravest men I ever served with. And in his last moments, he spoke only of you. He made me promise to take care of you, and I failed to keep that promise. Until now." The market continued its noisy commerce around them, but for these two people, the world had narrowed to this single moment of connection across the chasm of loss and time. President Traoré extended his hand to Aisha. "Come," he said gently. "Let's get you something to eat, and you can tell me how you came to be here." Aisha hesitated, her instincts warring against hope. She had been disappointed too many times to trust easily. But something in the man's eyes, a genuine sorrow mixed with determination, made her reach out and take his hand. He led her to a small restaurant a few streets away from the market, a modest establishment with plastic tables and chairs under a corrugated roof. The smell of cooking oil and spices filled the air. He ordered 2 plates of rice with sauce, and as they waited for the food, Aisha began to talk. The story that emerged was a familiar one in this part of the world, yet no less tragic for its commonality. After her father's death in service, she had expected to receive military benefits, the pension and support that the government supposedly provided to families of fallen soldiers. But the bureaucracy had been labyrinthine, the officials corrupt. Papers got lost. Appointments were missed because she couldn't read the notifications properly. People demanded bribes she couldn't afford. Her father's relatives, who had always been distant, suddenly appeared after his death. They claimed the small house where she had grown up, insisting it had belonged to them all along. With no legal documents to prove otherwise and no money for lawyers, Aisha had been forced out onto the streets. She had tried to find work, but opportunities for an uneducated young woman with no connections were scarce. She had worked for a time as a housemaid for a wealthy family, but the lady of the house had accused her of stealing jewelry that had simply been misplaced. Cast out without pay, Aisha had fallen further. Friends she had known in school had moved on with their lives, some embarrassed to be seen with someone who had fallen so low, others simply too occupied with their own struggles to help. Slowly, inevitably, she had descended into begging, sitting day after day in the same spot in the market, hoping for enough coins to buy food for the day. As Aisha spoke, her voice growing stronger as the food revived her, President Traoré listened with increasing pain in his heart. This was the daughter of a man who had given everything for his country, reduced to begging in the very streets that Hero had died to protect. It was an injustice he could not let stand. When she finished her story, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice filled with resolve. "Aisha, I cannot change the past. I cannot bring your father back or undo the injustices you have suffered, but I can honor his memory by honoring his final wish. I am going to help you, but not in the way you might expect." Aisha looked at him with confusion, and hope mingled in her expression. "I'm not going to simply give you money," the president continued. "Money disappears quickly, and then you would be back where you started. Instead, I'm going to give you an opportunity to build something lasting, to earn your living with dignity, the way your father would have wanted." 2 days later, as the morning sun painted the market in shades of gold and amber, a group of workers arrived at an empty stall space not far from where Aisha had been begging. They were not soldiers or government officials in their formal attire, but carpenters, painters, and laborers in work clothes, carrying tools and materials. The market vendors watched with curiosity as the workers set about their task with efficient purpose. They erected a solid wooden frame, installed shelving units, and painted the walls a beautiful shade of blue, the color of hope and new beginnings. Over the course of 2 days, the transformation was remarkable. What had been an abandoned, derelict space became a clean, welcoming stall. On the 3rd day, a sign was mounted above the entrance. Hand-painted in careful letters, it read, "Aisha Food Stall, Earning with Dignity." That afternoon, President Traoré himself arrived, and with him was Aisha. She stood before the stall in disbelief, her hand covering her mouth, tears streaming down her face. The president had also provided her with new clothes, modest but clean and respectable, and she looked transformed. "This is yours," President Traoré said, gesturing to the stall. "Inside, you'll find everything you need to start a small food business. Sacks of rice, beans, flour, cooking oil, vegetables, spices. This is your capital, your beginning." Aisha was overwhelmed. "Sir, I don't know what to say. How can I ever repay you?" The president placed a hand on her shoulder. "You repay me by succeeding, by working hard and earning your living with dignity, by showing others that even when fate has been cruel, determination and honest work can rebuild a life. Your father gave his life for this country. The least we can do is ensure his daughter has the chance to build a life worth living." "But what if I fail?" Aisha asked, her voice small. "What if I can't make this work?" "Then you will learn from the failure and try again," Ibrahim said firmly. "But I don't believe you will fail. You have your father's blood in your veins. You survived years of hardship. You have strength you don't even know you possess. Remember, Aisha, I'm not giving you a handout. I'm giving you a hand up. What you build from here is up to you." Aisha wiped her tears and straightened her shoulders. "I promise you, sir. I promise on my father's memory. I will work hard. I will make this succeed. I will never beg again." The president smiled. "That's all I ask. Remember, dignity comes not from what others give you, but from what you earn through your own efforts." The small crowd that had gathered to watch this exchange broke into applause. Some had tears in their eyes. Everyone loves a story of redemption, of hope rising from despair. For a moment, the harsh realities of life in this struggling nation seemed less overwhelming. The first weeks of Aisha's new business went well. She rose early each morning before the sun had fully risen and walked to her stall with purpose in her step. She cleaned the space thoroughly, arranged her goods attractively, and greeted customers with genuine warmth. Her prices were fair, her produce fresh, and slowly but surely, regular customers began to emerge. The other market vendors, who had watched her transformation with interest, now nodded to her respectfully as they passed. Some offered advice on suppliers or negotiating tactics. A few older women, reminded perhaps of their own daughters, took her under their wing, teaching her tricks of the trade that only experience could provide. Aisha felt something she hadn't experienced in years: pride. Each evening, when she counted her day's earnings, modest though they were, she felt a sense of accomplishment. This money was hers, earned through her own efforts. No one could take it away or make her feel less than human for having it. But human nature is complex, and the human heart is vulnerable to poisons more subtle than any physical toxin. As weeks turned into months, Aisha began to notice things that planted seeds of discontent in her heart. She noticed the wealthy customers who came to the market. Women dressed in expensive fabrics with gold jewelry gleaming at their necks and wrists. They bought without haggling, barely looking at the prices, their minds clearly occupied with concerns far removed from making ends meet. She noticed the vendors whose stalls were larger, whose goods were more varied, who seemed to do triple the business she did without apparent effort. At first, these observations were innocent enough. But gradually, insidiously, they began to transform into something darker. "Why should they have so much while I have so little?" she began to think. "I work just as hard. I suffered more than most of them ever will. Don't I deserve more than this?" The gratitude she had felt for her opportunity began to be overshadowed by a feeling that she was owed something more. The progress she was making, slow but steady, began to feel insufficient. She wanted rapid success, immediate wealth, the kind of transformation that would make everyone who had once looked down on her now look up to her with envy. This shift in her mindset was subtle at first. She became less patient with customers who haggled too vigorously. She began to cut corners, buying slightly lower quality goods because they were cheaper, rationalizing that the difference was negligible. She spent more time calculating her profits and less time focusing on providing good service. And then, one sweltering afternoon, when the heat seemed to press down on the market like a physical weight, a man approached her stall. He was well dressed in the casual way of successful merchants, expensive but understated clothing, a gold watch glinting on his wrist. His name was Malik, and he had the smooth manner of someone who made his living through clever deals rather than honest labor. "Sister," he said with a smile that was all teeth and no warmth, "you have a nice little operation here. But tell me, how long will it take you to become truly successful at this pace? Years? Decades?" Aisha looked at him warily. "What do you mean?" Malik leaned against her counter, his eyes appraising her stock. "I mean that you're thinking too small. You're working retail, piece by piece, day by day. That's the hard way. The smart way is to think wholesale, to think big." He pulled out a wallet thick with bills. "I'll make you an offer. Sell me all your current stock, everything you have. I'll pay you cash right now, more than you'd make selling it piece by piece over the next month. Then, with that money, you can expand, move to a better location, really build something." Aisha felt her heart beat faster. The money he was showing her represented more cash than she had seen in years. With that kind of capital, she could indeed expand significantly. She could lease a larger space, hire help, become a real businesswoman instead of a small-time vendor. But even as the temptation pulled at her, another voice spoke in her mind, the voice of President Traoré from that first day. "This stall is not just about business, Aisha. It's about building something sustainable, something you can be proud of. Don't let greed or impatience destroy what you're building." For a moment she hesitated, balanced on the knife's edge between wisdom and folly, and then greed won. "How much?" she asked. The transaction happened quickly. Malik counted out the bills, Aisha signed a simple receipt, and within an hour her stall was empty. The shelves that had been neatly stocked with goods now stood bare. The blue walls seemed to lose their luster, as if the soul of the place had been extracted along with the merchandise. Aisha clutched the money, her heart racing with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. This was her chance, she told herself. This was how successful people operated: bold moves, calculated risks. She would show everyone that she was more than just a charity case who had been given a handout. That evening, instead of carefully counting her earnings and planning for tomorrow as she usually did, Aisha went shopping in a different part of the market, the section where wealthy people bought their clothes and accessories. She purchased new dresses, shoes with small heels, a handbag made of leather, and a bottle of perfume that cost more than she used to earn in a week of selling produce. The transformation was immediate and intoxicating. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she saw someone different. Someone who looked successful, sophisticated, worthy of respect. For the first time in years, she felt she could walk with her head high, not because of what she was building, but because of how she looked. The next day, instead of returning to her stall, she went to one of the cafes that catered to the city's middle class, places she had previously only glimpsed from outside. She ordered coffee and pastries, sat at a small table, and watched the world go by. Other customers glanced at her, and she imagined they were thinking how well-dressed and prosperous she looked. She took photographs with her phone, carefully composed to show her coffee, her outfit, the pleasant surroundings. She posted them online with captions about new beginnings and living my best life. The likes and comments from people she barely knew gave her a rush of validation. Days became weeks, and Aisha found herself caught in a cycle of spending and validation-seeking. She made new friends, or rather, people who attached themselves to her because she was spending money freely. They suggested expensive outings, restaurants beyond her means, entertainment that drained her resources. These new friends praised her generosity, complimented her appearance, and made her feel important. But none of them asked about her goals, her late father, or her plans for the future. They were interested in what she could provide in the present moment, not who she was as a person. Meanwhile, the blue stall stood empty and neglected. Passers-by who had been regular customers wondered what had happened. Some asked other vendors who could only shrug and speculate. The sign above the door, "Earning with Dignity," began to seem like a cruel joke, a reminder of promises broken. Within 2 months, Aisha's money was gone. The thick wad of bills Malik had given her had melted away like ice under the African sun, spent on things that provided momentary pleasure but no lasting value. Her new friends disappeared as quickly as her money, suddenly too busy to return her calls or messages. She found herself back at the blue stall one evening, staring at its empty interior. The reality of what she had done crashed down on her with devastating force. She had taken the opportunity she had been given, the opportunity, bought with her father's sacrifice and the president's compassion, and squandered it on vanity and foolishness. But instead of accepting responsibility, Aisha's mind took a different path. It was easier to be angry than to be ashamed. It was easier to blame others than to confront her own failures. Anger is a seductive emotion. It provides energy when we feel powerless, gives us direction when we feel lost, and shields us from painful truths we don't want to face. Aisha, standing before her empty stall, chose anger over introspection. "This is all their fault," she muttered to herself. "The president set me up to fail. He gave me just enough to tantalize me, but not enough to really succeed. That merchant Malik cheated me. The system is rigged against people like me." These thoughts, once planted, grew quickly in the fertile soil of her resentment. She began to rewrite history in her mind. The president's help became a public relations stunt. The stall had been inadequate from the start. She had been a victim, manipulated and discarded. With this twisted narrative firmly established in her mind, Aisha decided that the world needed to hear her story, the truth, as she now believed it to be. She began speaking to other vendors in the market, carefully crafting her tale to paint herself as a victim of presidential exploitation. "You know how he came to me, made a big show of helping me," she would say, her voice dripping with bitterness. "It was all for the cameras, all for his image. He wanted to look good, like he cares about people like us. But it was fake, all fake. The moment the publicity was over, I was abandoned." Some listeners were skeptical, remembering how proud and hopeful Aisha had been when she first opened her stall. But others, nursing their own grievances against the government or life in general, were receptive to her narrative. Rumors began to spread, whispers that grew with each retelling. Then Aisha met Farid, a young blogger who ran a sensationalist website that thrived on scandal and outrage. Farid had no interest in truth. He was interested in clicks, views, and the advertising revenue they generated. When Aisha approached him with her story, he saw an opportunity. "Tell me everything," he said, his phone already recording. "Don't hold back. The people need to know the truth about their so-called leader." In front of Farid's camera, Aisha delivered a performance worthy of an actress. She wept as she described her exploitation. She claimed that the president had promised her much more than he delivered, that his people had threatened her when she complained, that the whole thing had been a setup designed to make him look good while actually harming her. The lies came easily, each one building on the last. By the time she finished, even she almost believed her own story. Farid edited the video for maximum emotional impact, added dramatic music and text overlays, and titled it "Presidential Betrayal, a Poor Woman's Cry for Justice." The video went viral. Within hours, it had been shared thousands of times. People who had never heard of Aisha and knew nothing about her situation rushed to express their outrage. Social media filled with angry comments about presidential hypocrisy, systemic corruption, and the exploitation of the poor. Some voices tried to inject reason, pointing out that the story seemed one-sided and lacked evidence. But in the echo chamber of online outrage, nuance and skepticism were drowned out by emotional reactions. The story fit too perfectly into existing narratives about political corruption and the gap between rich and poor. People wanted to believe it because it confirmed their existing views. For Aisha, watching her video spread across the internet, there was a moment of triumph. She had hurt the man who had failed her, as she saw it. She had made people pay attention to her grievances. She felt powerful in a way she hadn't since before her father's death, but that feeling was hollow, and somewhere deep inside, she knew it. Not everyone in the market had forgotten the truth. Among the vendors was an elderly woman named Mama Mariama, who had sold vegetables in that market for 40 years. She had seen presidents come and go, had watched the city grow and change, and had developed a keen eye for human nature. Mama Mariama had witnessed Aisha's entire journey, from desperate beggar to hopeful entrepreneur to foolish spendthrift to bitter accuser. She had said nothing, believing that people needed to make their own mistakes and learn their own lessons. But when she saw the viral video and the wave of undeserved criticism aimed at President Traoré, her conscience would not let her remain silent. The old woman made her way to the presidential palace, a journey that took her hours on foot because she refused to spend money on transportation. The guards at the gate initially tried to turn her away, but she planted her feet firmly and declared in a voice that carried the authority of age and integrity, "I have information that concerns the president's honor. I will wait here until he hears me, even if it takes days." Something in her demeanor convinced the guards to pass the message along. To their surprise, President Traoré himself came to the gate within the hour. "Mama," he said respectfully, "what brings you here?" Mama Mariama looked at him with eyes that had seen much and judged wisely. "Mr. President, I come to speak truth to power, though in this case power already knows the truth. I am here to speak it for others to hear." She proceeded to tell him everything she had witnessed, how Aisha had been given a genuine opportunity, how she had squandered it through her own choices, how she was now spreading lies to avoid facing her own responsibility. President Traoré listened quietly, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he thanked her and said, "Mama, I appreciate your honesty, but I will not respond to these accusations with anger or punishment. Truth has a way of emerging in its own time. Sometimes the best response to lies is patient silence, allowing those who spread them to entangle themselves in their own contradictions." "But sir," Mama Mariama protested, "your reputation will survive a lying video," he interrupted gently. "My reputation is less important than Aisha's soul. If I retaliate with anger, I push her further into the dark place she's created for herself. If I respond with truth delivered calmly, I leave open the possibility of redemption." The president's response, when it came, was not what anyone expected. He did not issue an angry denial or attack Aisha's character. Instead, he simply released security camera footage from the market. The footage showed Aisha's stall being stocked, showed her early days of successful trading, and most damningly, showed Malik arriving and the entire transaction by which she sold off her inventory. There was no audio, but the images told a clear story. There were also bank records showing that no government threats had been made, no accounts frozen, no harassment of any kind. The evidence was presented without comment, without drama. Just facts, laid bare for people to see and judge for themselves. The reaction was swift and brutal. The same social media ecosystem that had amplified Aisha's accusations now turned on her with even greater ferocity. She was called a liar, a fraud, a manipulator. Farid, the blogger who had promoted her story, deleted the video and disappeared from the internet entirely, his reputation in tatters. Aisha watched her phone blow up with messages, mostly angry, some gleeful at her exposure, none sympathetic. She felt the ground disappearing beneath her feet. The lie that had briefly given her a sense of power and vindication now crushed her under its weight. She tried to leave her room, but neighbors who had previously been friendly now avoided her gaze. She went to the market, hoping perhaps to find some familiar face who might show kindness, but people whispered and pointed. Children ran behind her, chanting cruel rhymes. Vendors who had once greeted her now turned their backs. That night, unable to sleep, she found herself walking through the empty market, past closed stalls and shuttered shops. Her feet carried her without conscious direction to the blue stall. It stood there in the moonlight, abandoned and sad. The paint was peeling, and someone had spray-painted graffiti on one wall. But the sign above the door remained, "Earning with Dignity." Those words, which had once filled her with hope, now felt like an accusation. She had been given dignity, and she had thrown it away. She had been given an opportunity to earn, and she had sold it for a quick profit that vanished like smoke. For the first time since beginning her campaign of lies, Aisha felt the weight of what she had done, not to the president, but to herself. She had betrayed her father's memory, squandered the president's generosity, and worst of all, she had lost her own self-respect. She sank to the ground in front of the stall and wept. These were different tears from the self-pitying ones she had shed for the camera. These were tears of genuine remorse, of a soul finally confronting its own darkness. In the days that followed, Aisha experienced what it truly meant to fall from grace. The viral attention that had briefly made her feel powerful and relevant now made her a pariah. She couldn't walk down the street without feeling eyes on her, couldn't enter a shop without sensing the judgment of those around her. But something had shifted inside her during that night of weeping before the blue stall. The protective shell of anger and blame that she had built around herself had cracked, and through that crack, reality had begun to seep in. She began to replay her entire journey in her mind, but this time with honesty. She remembered the genuine kindness in President Traoré's eyes when he first recognized her. She remembered the care with which the stall had been prepared, the quality of the goods she had been given. She remembered the advice and encouragement from other vendors when she was starting out, and she remembered her own choices, the decision to sell her inventory for quick cash, the spending sprees, the cultivation of false friends, the lies she told to avoid responsibility. No one had forced these choices on her. They were hers, and hers alone. This realization was painful in a way that physical hunger had never been. It's one thing to be a victim of circumstances. It's another to recognize that you are the architect of your own downfall. One morning, as the sun rose over the city, Aisha made a decision. She would return to the presidential palace, not to make demands or accusations, but to do something she should have done long ago, take responsibility and ask for forgiveness. The walk to the palace felt longer than it had the first time. Each step was heavy with shame, but also with a strange sense of lightness, the lightness that comes from finally deciding to tell the truth, whatever the cost. The guards recognized her immediately. She expected them to turn her away with disgust or perhaps even arrest her for her false accusations. Instead, they looked at her with something like pity, and after a brief consultation, allowed her to enter. She was led to the same office where she had once stood and hurled accusations. President Traoré sat behind his desk, his face weathered with the weight of leadership, but his eyes still kind. "Mr. President," Aisha began, her voice trembling, "I have come to confess and to apologize. Everything I said about you was a lie. You gave me an incredible opportunity, and I wasted it through my own foolishness and greed. Then, instead of accepting responsibility, I tried to destroy your reputation to make myself feel better. I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed you to hear the truth from my own lips." The president was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Aisha, I knew the truth all along. The question was whether you would ever acknowledge it." "I don't deserve another chance," she said, tears streaming down her face. "But if there's any way I can make amends, any work I can do, any service I can provide, I want to try. Not for a reward, but because I need to prove to myself that I can be the person my father believed I could be." President Traoré stood and walked to the window, looking out over the city. "There is a rural development program in the southern provinces," he said finally. "We're working with farming communities, helping women learn agricultural skills and establish small cooperatives. It's hard work, physical labor in the hot sun, living in basic conditions. There's no glamour, no shortcuts, but it's honest work that makes a real difference. Would you be willing to do that?" Aisha didn't hesitate. "Yes, I'll do whatever is needed." The president turned to look at her. "I'm not punishing you, Aisha. I'm giving you another opportunity, but this time it's an opportunity to rebuild your character, not just your circumstances. The choice, as always, is yours." The journey to the southern provinces took 2 days by bus over rough roads. Aisha traveled with a small bag containing everything she owned, which wasn't much after her spending spree had ended. The landscape gradually changed from the urban sprawl of Ouagadougou to open savanna, then to more fertile lands where agriculture was possible with hard work and careful management. The village where she was assigned was called Dandé, a collection of mud brick houses and small farms clustered around a central well. The Women's Agricultural Cooperative operated on a plot of land provided by the government, where women were learning modern farming techniques, sustainable practices, and basic business skills. When Aisha arrived, she was greeted by the program coordinator, a middle-aged woman named Fatou who had worked in development for 20 years. Fatou looked at this city girl with her soft hands and uncertain expression and saw thousands of others, like her, people who thought they understood hardship, but had no idea what real work entailed. "You'll start in the fields tomorrow," Fatou said simply. "We begin at sunrise before the heat becomes unbearable. Bring water, wear a hat, and don't expect anyone to go easy on you." That first day in the fields nearly broke Aisha. Within an hour of hoeing weeds under the rising sun, her hands were blistered and her back ached. By midday, she felt dizzy and nauseous from the heat and exertion. Other women, most of them twice her age, worked steadily around her, making her efforts look clumsy and ineffective. She wanted to quit. Every muscle in her body screamed at her to stop, to walk away, to declare this impossible. But then she thought of her father, of the far worse conditions he had endured as a soldier. She thought of President Traoré, who had given her this chance knowing full well she might fail. And she thought of the blue stall standing empty as a monument to her previous failure. She kept working. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, Aisha began to change. Her hands, which had blistered, grew calloused and strong. Her body, which had ached constantly, adapted to the physical demands. More importantly, her mind began to shift. Working in the fields gave her time to think, and the physical exhaustion at the end of each day brought a kind of peace she had never known. She began to understand something fundamental. There was dignity in this work, a deeper satisfaction than she had ever felt when spending money on superficial things or seeking validation from shallow friends. The other women in the cooperative were initially wary of her. Word had traveled even to this remote place about the city girl who had lied about the president. But Aisha didn't try to make excuses or win them over with words. She simply worked day after day, proving through her actions that she was committed to change. Gradually, the walls came down. An older woman named Aminata began teaching her the proper way to plant seeds, explaining that each type of crop needed different spacing, different depth, different care. "Farming is about patience," Aminata said, her hands demonstrating as she spoke. "You plant today, but you don't harvest until the season is right. If you try to rush it, you get nothing." Aisha absorbed these lessons, understanding that they applied to more than just agriculture. She had wanted quick success, instant gratification, and it had destroyed her. Now she was learning the value of steady, patient effort toward a distant goal. 3 months into her time in Dandé, something remarkable happened. The seeds that the cooperative had planted began to sprout. Aisha stood at the edge of the field one morning, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, and saw the first green shoots pushing through the dark earth. It was such a simple thing, yet it moved her to tears. "I did that," she whispered to herself. "My hands helped create that." Fatou, the coordinator, noticed Aisha's transformation. She saw how the young woman who had arrived soft and uncertain had become strong and reliable. More importantly, she saw the change in Aisha's eyes. The emptiness had been replaced by purpose. "You're doing well," Fatou told her one evening. "Better than I expected, honestly. You could have a future in this work if you want it." "I want it," Aisha said without hesitation. "For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm building something real, not for show, not for others' approval, but because it matters." As the months passed, Aisha took on more responsibilities. She began teaching new arrivals the skills she had learned, passing on the lessons that Aminata and others had taught her. She helped develop a small business plan for the cooperative to sell their produce at regional markets. She became known not as the girl who lied about the president, but as Sister Aisha, who works harder than anyone. The harvest season arrived, and the cooperative's fields yielded well. The women celebrated together, sharing a feast made from their own crops. As Aisha bit into fresh vegetables that she had helped grow from seeds, she experienced a satisfaction deeper than any meal she had eaten during her brief period of fake prosperity. That night, she wrote a letter to President Traoré. It was simple and heartfelt. Mr. President, you told me once that you were giving me seeds, not just money. I didn't understand what you meant. Now I do. Seeds must be planted in good soil, tended with care, and given time to grow. I wasted the first seeds you gave me. But these new seeds, the lessons I'm learning here, I promise to nurture them. Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I gave up on myself. Your friend's daughter, Aisha. 6 months after arriving in Dande, Aisha received unexpected news. President Traoré was coming to the southern provinces to inspect various rural development programs, and the women's cooperative was on his itinerary. The news sent ripples of excitement through the village. The president rarely visited such remote areas, and his coming was seen as a great honor. The women worked extra hard to ensure the fields looked their best. The cooperative's records were in order, and their small farm stand was well stocked with their produce. Aisha felt a complex mixture of emotions. She was nervous about facing the president again, worried that her presence might somehow embarrass him or the program. She considered asking to be absent during his visit, but Fatou wouldn't hear of it. You're part of this cooperative now, Fatou said firmly. You've earned your place here through your work. Don't hide from your past. Stand tall in your present. The day of the visit arrived bright and clear. The presidential convoy rolled into the village, raising dust that glittered in the morning sunlight. President Traoré emerged from his vehicle, and Aisha was struck by how much older he looked than their last meeting. The weight of leadership was visible on his face, in the lines around his eyes and the gray in his hair. He toured the fields, asking intelligent questions about crop rotation, irrigation, and yields. The women demonstrated their techniques, and he listened attentively, occasionally making notes. When the tour reached the section where Aisha was working, she stood straight, her hands clasped in front of her, eyes downcast. The president stopped in front of her. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he said, "Look at me, Aisha." She raised her eyes to meet his. "Your hands," he said, gesturing to her calloused, work-hardened hands. "Those are the hands of someone who has learned what honest labor means." "Yes, sir," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion she felt. "You were right. You gave me seeds and I ate them instead of planting them. But I understand now. A seed planted grows into something that can feed you for seasons. A seed eaten satisfies you for one meal." President Traoré smiled, a genuine expression of warmth and pride. "You've learned the most important lesson anyone can learn, that real wealth isn't measured in money, but in character built through honest effort." Later, during a meeting with the cooperative's leadership, Fatou presented their achievements and future plans. She concluded by saying, "And I want to particularly recognize Ayesha Daoud, who has become one of our most dedicated workers and an excellent teacher for new participants." The president nodded. "I know Aisha's story. It's a story of failure and redemption, of mistakes and growth. It's a story I want more people to hear. Not the false version she once told, but the true version. Because true stories, even painful ones, have the power to inspire others who are struggling." He turned to Aisha. "Would you be willing to share your real story? To speak honestly about your mistakes and what you learned from them? It would help the program, help other young people who might be facing similar temptations." Aisha felt a flutter of fear. Sharing her story meant exposing her failures, her lies, her shame. But she had learned that hiding from truth only gives it more power over you. "Yes, sir," she said. "If my mistakes can help someone else avoid them, then at least they'll have served a purpose." Over the following months, Aisha became an unexpected spokesperson for the Dignity of Work program. She gave talks at schools, community centers, and market squares. always telling her story with unflinching honesty. She spoke about the desperation of poverty, the temptation of quick fixes, and the seductive nature of greed. She talked about how easy it is to blame others when we fail, and how much courage it takes to accept responsibility for our own choices. Most importantly, she spoke about the difference between being given a handout and being given an opportunity, and why the latter, though harder, is far more valuable. Her speeches were not polished or professional. She sometimes stumbled over words, and her voice would crack with emotion when she spoke about her father or about her darkest moments. But this raw authenticity gave her words power. People didn't see a politician or a performer. They saw someone who had truly lived what she was describing. Young people, especially young women who felt trapped by circumstances, responded strongly to her message. They saw in Aisha not a saint or a hero, but someone like themselves, flawed, struggling, but choosing to move forward despite past failures. One girl, perhaps 15 years old, approached Aisha after a talk in a provincial town. "Sister Aisha," she said shyly, "I've been thinking about dropping out of school because my family needs money. I thought I should just find quick work, make money fast. But hearing your story, I think maybe I should be patient, finish my education, plant seeds for the future instead of just eating today's bread." Aisha hugged the girl, tears in her eyes. "That's exactly right," she said. "And when things get hard, when patience feels impossible, remember that seeds grow in darkness and silence before they break through into the light. Trust the process." The blue stall in Ouagadougou's market, which had stood empty and neglected, became a symbol in Aisha's talks. She would describe it in detail: the blue walls, the shelves, the sign reading "Earning with Dignity," and explain how it represented both her greatest opportunity and her worst mistake. "That stall is still there," she would say. "Empty, abandoned, a monument to my foolishness. But one day I hope to return to it. Not to reclaim it as mine, but to help someone else use it the way I should have. To give another person the chance I wasted, and to help them succeed where I failed." A year and a half after she had first left for the southern provinces, Aisha received a letter from President Traoré. It was brief. "Aisha, your work in the Rural Development Program has exceeded all expectations. You have transformed yourself and helped transform many others. I believe it's time for you to return to where your journey began. The blue stall is waiting. This time I trust you'll treat it with the respect it deserves. With regards, Ibrahim Traoré." Aisha read the letter 3 times, her hands shaking. "Return to Ouagadougou? Return to the blue stall?" The thought filled her with equal parts excitement and terror. Could she face the people who had witnessed her fall? Could she succeed this time where she had failed so spectacularly before? She sought counsel from Fatou and Aminata. Both women encouraged her. "You're not the same person who left here," Fatou said. "You've proven that through your actions. Now go prove it to everyone else." Aminata added, "And remember, you're not going back empty-handed. You carry with you all the lessons you've learned, all the character you've built. That's capital that can never be stolen or wasted." The journey back to Ouagadougou felt surreal. As the bus rolled through familiar landscapes, Aisha felt like she was traveling not just through space, but through time, returning to a past version of herself to make peace with it. When she arrived at the market, her heart pounded. Everything was familiar, yet somehow different. The same vendors were there, older now, still calling out their wares. The same sounds and smells filled the air. And there, in the midst of it all, stood the blue stall. It looked worse than she remembered. The paint was faded and peeling. Graffiti covered parts of the walls, and the sign above the door hung at an angle, one of its supports broken. But it was still standing, still there, still waiting. A small crowd gathered as workers, sent by the president, began renovating the stall. Over the course of 3 days, they repainted the walls that same hopeful shade of blue, repaired the shelving, fixed the sign, and thoroughly cleaned the space. Aisha worked alongside them, refusing to just supervise. Her hands, toughened by farm work, were well suited to the labor. Mama Mariama, the elderly vegetable seller who had spoken truth on Aisha's behalf, came by during the renovation. She stood watching for a moment, then approached Aisha. "So," she said, her voice neutral, "you've come back." "Yes, Mama," Aisha replied respectfully, pausing in her work. "I've come back to do it right this time." Mama Mariama studied her face, her eyes sharp and assessing. Then she nodded slowly. "I see it in you now, something that wasn't there before. Humility. Real humility, not the fake kind that's just pride wearing a mask. Welcome back, child. This market needs more people who understand the value of honest work." On the day of the stall's reopening, a small ceremony was held. President Traoré himself attended, along with representatives from the Rural Development Program and various community leaders. A significant crowd gathered, some supportive, some skeptical, all curious. The president gave a brief speech. "This stall represents something important," he said. "Not just one woman's second chance, but a principle that our nation must embrace, that failure is not final, that mistakes can be teachers, and that redemption is possible for those willing to do the hard work of change." Aisha Daoud failed once. She failed spectacularly and publicly. But instead of accepting defeat, she accepted responsibility. Instead of making excuses, she made changes. Now she returns not as the person she was, but as the person she has become. He turned to Aisha. "The blue stall is yours again. What will you do with it?" Aisha stepped forward, her voice clear and strong. "This time, I will treat it as what it is. Not a quick path to wealth, but a foundation for building something lasting. I will work with patience and integrity. I will help others as I have been helped. And I will honor the memory of my father by living with dignity." She paused, looking around at the gathered crowd. "I also want to say this. I lied about President Traoré. I accused him falsely because I couldn't face my own failures. That was wrong, and I'm deeply sorry. He gave me an incredible gift, and I threw it away. He could have abandoned me to the consequences of my choices, but instead, he gave me another chance. That's the kind of leader we have, even if I was too blind to see it before." The crowd erupted in applause. Not everyone was convinced. Some remained skeptical, and some would always remember her lies more than her redemption. But many were moved by her honesty and her visible transformation. The second incarnation of Aisha's food stall operated on very different principles than the first. This time, Aisha kept meticulous records of every transaction. She was scrupulously fair in her pricing and honest about the quality of her goods. When produce wasn't as fresh as it should be, she either discounted it appropriately or didn't sell it at all, even if it meant losing potential profit. She applied the agricultural knowledge she had gained in Dande, understanding seasonality and crop cycles in ways that helped her buy smartly and manage inventory efficiently. She built relationships with farmers from the cooperative, creating a direct supply chain that benefited both them and her customers. But perhaps most importantly, she transformed the Blue Stall into more than just a business. She began offering informal mentoring to other young vendors, sharing both her business knowledge and her life lessons. Young people who were struggling with the temptations she had faced found in her a sympathetic ear and wise counsel. "I know what it's like to want shortcuts," she would tell them. "I know how hard it is to work day after day and see only small progress. But I also know what happens when you take those shortcuts. Quick money disappears quickly. Character built slowly lasts forever." She also started a small lending circle with other women vendors, pooling resources to help each other expand their businesses gradually and sustainably. It was the opposite of the quick, flashy approach Malik had offered her. This was slow, careful, mutual support that built trust and community. The market began to change around her. Other vendors, inspired by her example, started treating their businesses more professionally. The lending circle grew. Young people who might have been tempted by quick schemes or dishonest practices saw in Aisha a different model, one that was harder but ultimately more rewarding. Mama Mariama became a close friend and advisor. The elderly woman had lived long enough to see many people fall and few rise again. Aisha's transformation pleased her deeply. She often sat near the Blue Stall during slow afternoon hours, and the two women would talk about life, business, and the complex art of human dignity. "You know what makes you different now?" Mama Mariama said one day. "It's not that you don't make mistakes anymore. Everyone makes mistakes. It's that you've stopped being afraid of admitting them. When you're not afraid of the truth about yourself, other people's opinions lose their power over you." Aisha nodded thoughtfully. I wasted so much energy trying to appear successful, trying to make people think I was more than I was. Now I just try to be honest about where I am and where I'm going. It's simpler. Harder in some ways, but simpler. 6 months after reopening, Aisha achieved a milestone that might seem small to others but was enormous to her. She saved enough money to rent a small room in a modest neighborhood. It wasn't much, just a single room with basic amenities, but it was hers, earned through her own efforts. And she could afford it without stress because she had built her business on a solid foundation. The night she moved into that room, she sat on the floor, furniture would come later, when she could afford it without straining her budget, and felt a deep sense of peace. This tiny space represented something no mansion could match. Proof that she could take care of herself through honest work. As Aisha's business stabilized and grew, she found herself thinking about the other young women who, like her younger self, were struggling with poverty, temptation, and hopelessness. The speeches she had given during her time with the Rural Development Program had planted a seed of an idea, and now that seed was ready to grow. She approached President Traoré with a proposal. "Sir," she said during a meeting at the palace, "I want to expand what we're doing. The Blue Stall has become more than just my business, it's become a symbol. I want to create a foundation that helps other young women start their own businesses the right way, with training, mentoring, and support." The president leaned back in his chair, a slight smile on his face. "Tell me more," Aisha had prepared carefully. She outlined a program that would combine the best elements of her own journey: practical business training, character development, mentorship from experienced vendors, and access to small startup loans. But most importantly, it would emphasize patience, integrity, and sustainable growth over quick profits. "I want to call it the Dignity Foundation," she said, "because that's what we're really offering. Not just business opportunities, but the chance to earn a living with dignity." President Traoré was impressed. "You've thought this through carefully, but running a foundation is very different from running a market stall. It requires organization, administration, fundraising. Are you ready for that?" "No," Aisha admitted honestly. "I'm not ready yet, but I'm willing to learn just like I learned farming, just like I learned business. And I won't try to build it overnight. I'll grow it slowly, carefully, the right way." The president approved seed funding for the foundation, and Aisha began the hard work of building an organization. She partnered with Fatu from the Rural Development Program, who had the administrative expertise Aisha lacked. She brought in Mama Mariama as an advisor, valuing her decades of market experience and wisdom about human nature. The foundation started small, helping just 5 young women in its first year. Each received basic business training, mentorship, and a small loan to start a market stall or similar small business. But unlike other programs, the Dignity Foundation didn't measure success by how quickly participants grew their businesses. Instead, it tracked character development, financial literacy, and sustainable practices. Aisha personally mentored each participant, meeting with them weekly to discuss not just business challenges, but life challenges. She was unflinchingly honest about her own past failures, using her story as a teaching tool. "The biggest trap," she would tell them, "is thinking that you're somehow different from me, that you won't make the same mistakes. Everyone thinks that. The key is to build safeguards into your life. People you trust who will tell you the truth, practices that keep you accountable, and most importantly, a clear understanding of why you're doing this." One of the first participants was a young woman named Fatima, whose story echoed Aisha's in painful ways. She had lost her parents, fallen into poverty, and was teetering on the edge of despair. Aisha saw her younger self in Fatima and was determined to help her avoid the same mistakes. "Why do you want to start a business?" Aisha asked during their first meeting. "To make money," Fatima answered, which was honest but incomplete. "Why do you want to make money?" Fatima thought about it. "To not be poor anymore, to have nice things, to make people respect me," Aisha nodded. "Those are natural desires. But here's what I learned the hard way. If you build your business on wanting nice things and other people's respect, it will collapse. Because nice things don't satisfy and other people's respect is fickle. You need a deeper foundation. Like what? like wanting to take care of yourself with dignity, like wanting to honor the memory of people who sacrificed for you, like wanting to become someone you can respect, regardless of what others think. Build on that foundation and you'll weather any storm. Over time, Aisha refined her approach, learning what worked and what didn't. Some participants succeeded. Others struggled or failed. But even the failures were treated as learning opportunities rather than final judgments. The foundation began to develop a reputation for being tough but fair, demanding but supportive. By its third year, the Dignity Foundation was helping 25 young women annually. It had expanded beyond just market stalls to include other types of small businesses. And critically, it had achieved an impressive success rate, not because it only accepted participants likely to succeed, but because it provided genuine, comprehensive support. 5 years after her return to the Blue Stall, Aisha stood before a large crowd at the National Conference Center in Ouagadougou. She had been invited to speak at a national summit on youth employment and economic development. On the stage with her were government ministers, international development experts, and successful entrepreneurs. She was by far the least formally educated person present, yet she had been given a prime speaking slot. As she approached the podium, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. From beggar to failure to redemption to leader, it seemed almost impossible. Yet here she was, invited to share her insights with the nation's decision-makers. 5 years ago, she began, her voice steady, I stood in this city as a complete failure. I had been given an incredible opportunity by President Traoré, and I had wasted it through greed, impatience, and foolishness. Then I compounded my failure by lying about it, trying to blame others for my own mistakes. The audience was silent, listening intently. I tell you this not to dwell on my failures, but because understanding failure is essential to understanding success. We live in a world that celebrates overnight success stories, that makes wealth and fame seem like they should come quickly and easily. This is a lie. This lie destroys people. She spoke for 30 minutes, weaving together her personal story with broader observations about poverty, opportunity, and human dignity. She talked about the difference between aid that creates dependency and support that creates capacity. She spoke about the importance of patience in a world that demands instant gratification. The blue stall in the market, she said, became a symbol for me. It represents the choice we all face. Do we want something that looks good immediately but crumbles quickly, or do we want to build something that grows slowly but lasts? Quick wealth vanishes. Character endures. When she finished, the applause was thunderous. But more importantly, people approached her afterward with genuine questions and engagement. They wanted to know more about the Dignity Foundation, about her methods, about how her approach could be scaled. Among those who approached her was a young man, perhaps 19, with intelligent eyes and hungry expression. Miss Aisha, he said, I'm about to graduate from university, and I have people telling me to take a government job with quick money through corruption, or stay honest and struggle. After hearing you, I know what I should do. But I'm still scared. How do you keep going when the honest path is so much harder? Aisha smiled. I won't lie to you, it is harder. But here's what I've learned. The hard path makes you stronger, and the easy path makes you weaker. Every day you choose integrity over shortcuts. You're building something inside yourself that no one can take away. That strength will serve you for your entire life, while the money from corruption will eventually destroy you. Even if I stay poor, you won't stay poor if you're working honestly and smart. You might not get rich quickly, but you'll build security. More importantly, you'll be able to look at yourself in the mirror without shame. Trust me, I know what it's like to have money, but hate yourself. That's worse than being poor with dignity. The young man thanked her, and Aisha could see in his eyes that she had reached him. This, she realized, was why she had gone through everything she had experienced. Not just to save herself, but to be able to help save others. That evening, President Traoré hosted a small dinner for the summit's key speakers. Aisha found herself seated next to him, a positioning that still felt surreal despite her accomplishments. You've come a long way, the president said quietly. So only she could hear. We both have, Aisha replied. You gave me life twice. Once when you saw me in the market, And once when you gave me another chance after I had destroyed the first one. I'll never be able to repay that debt. President Traoré shook his head. There's no debt. You repaid whatever obligation existed by becoming who you are now. The woman sitting next to me today is someone your father would be proud of. That was always my only goal. Aisha felt tears prick her eyes. Do you really think so? That he would be proud? I know so. Sergeant Daoud was many things, but above all, he was a man of character. He valued integrity over everything else. You've built your life on integrity after learning the hard way why it matters. Yes, he would be proud. I'm certain of it. A decade after her first encounter with President Traoré in the market, Aisha stood once again at the blue stall. But now it looked very different. The stall had been expanded and renovated multiple times, transformed into the headquarters of the Dignity Foundation. The blue walls had been preserved, maintained as a reminder of where everything began, but the space now housed offices, a training center, and a small museum documenting the Foundation's work. The Foundation had grown beyond anything Aisha had initially imagined. It now operated in 12 cities across Burkina Faso, had helped over 300 young women start sustainable businesses, and had become a model studied by development organizations from other countries. International recognition had brought funding and opportunities, but Aisha had been careful not to let success corrupt the Foundation's core mission. She still personally mentored a small group of participants each year, refusing to become so elevated in her role that she lost touch with the daily struggles of those the Foundation served. She still lived modestly, having learned that contentment comes not from accumulating wealth, but from meaningful work and genuine relationships. Mama Mariama had passed away 2 years earlier, peacefully in her sleep at the age of 87. Aisha had been with her in the final days, and the old woman's last words to her had been simple. You did good, child. You did real good. President Traoré had completed his term and stepped down voluntarily, a rarity in African politics. He remained an advisor to the Foundation and visited occasionally, always pleased to see how the small seed he had planted had grown into such a substantial tree. On this particular morning, Aisha was welcoming a new group of young women to the Foundation's program. 15 faces looked at her with varying expressions: hope, skepticism, desperation, determination. She saw herself in each of them. Welcome, she began, standing in front of the preserved blue walls that had witnessed her greatest failure and her hardest-won success. You're here because you want to change your lives, and that desire is good. But I need to be honest with you from the start. This will not be easy, and it will not be quick. She pointed to the sign above the door, the original sign that had been preserved, earning with dignity. Those 3 words define everything we do here. Earning, because we believe in work, not handouts. With, because the process matters as much as the result. Dignity, because how you build your life is as important as what you build. She paused, looking into each face. I'm going to tell you my story. Not to discourage you, but because you need to understand that I am not better than you, smarter than you, or more deserving than you. I am simply someone who learned very painful lessons and decided to use them to help others avoid the same mistakes. As she began to tell her story once again, the begging, the opportunity, the waste, the lies, the redemption, she saw recognition dawning in some of the faces. These young women had heard of her, had perhaps judged her from a distance. Now they were seeing her as a real person, flawed and human. When she finished, a young woman in the back raised her hand timidly. Miss Aisha, my question is, what if we fail? What if we make mistakes like you did? Aisha smiled warmly. You will fail. You will make mistakes. That's not a possibility, it's a certainty. The question is not whether you'll fail, but what you'll do when you fail. Will you blame others and give up? Or will you accept responsibility and keep going? That choice will determine everything. Another woman asked, but how do we know we're making the right choices? How did you finally figure it out? Honest mentors, Aisha replied. People who cared enough to tell me the truth even when it was hard to hear. People I trusted enough to listen to. That's one reason this foundation exists. So you have people in your corner who will celebrate your successes and be honest about your mistakes. You don't have to figure everything out alone. The session continued for another hour, with Aisha answering questions, sharing insights, and beginning to build relationships with these new participants. As she spoke, she felt the familiar sense of purpose that had sustained her through the years. After the group left, Aisha stood alone in the blue stall for a few minutes, as she often did. She touched the wall, feeling the texture of the paint under her fingers. So much had happened here, in this modest space. A life had been saved, lost, and saved again. Dreams had died and been reborn stronger. She thought about her father, Sergeant Daoud, who had died on a dusty battlefield, never knowing what would become of his daughter. She hoped that somehow, wherever he was, he could see what she had become. She hoped he understood that his sacrifice had not been in vain. "I did it, Abba," she whispered into the empty stall. "I kept the promise. I'm earning my living with dignity, just like you would have wanted, and I'm helping others do the same. Your legacy lives on, not in monuments or statues, but in changed lives, including mine." A voice behind her made her turn. It was Fatima, one of the Foundation's first participants, who had succeeded beyond anyone's expectations and now ran her own successful food processing business. "Aisha," Fatima said, "there's a girl outside. She's in bad shape, looks like she's been sleeping rough, probably hasn't eaten in days. She heard about the foundation and wants to apply. I told her we're not accepting applications right now, but she's insistent." "What should I do?" Aisha felt a familiar stirring in her heart. She remembered being that desperate girl, remembered how President Traoré had seen past her circumstances to the person she could become. "Bring her in," Aisha said. "Let's hear her story." As Fatima left to fetch the girl, Aisha straightened her shoulders and prepared herself. This was the work. This was the purpose. This was what she had been saved for. Not just to rebuild her own life, but to help others build theirs. The girl who entered was perhaps 18, her clothes dirty, her eyes hollow with hunger and despair. She looked around the blue stall with a mixture of hope and disbelief, as if she couldn't quite believe such a place existed. "What's your name?" Aisha asked gently. "Zainab," the girl whispered. "Zainab, I'm Aisha. Welcome to the Dignity Foundation. Before we talk about what we can do for you, I want to tell you a story. It's the story of a girl who once sat in the dust of the market begging for coins until someone gave her a chance. That girl was me." And as Aisha began to tell her story once more, the cycle of redemption continued. The blue stall stood as it had for 10 years. A monument not to perfection, but to the power of second chances, honest work, and the indomitable human capacity for change. The sign above the door, weathered but still legible, proclaimed its simple truth to all who passed: earning with dignity. And in those 3 words lay a philosophy that had transformed one life and would continue to transform countless others. A reminder that true wealth is not measured in possessions, but in character. Not in what we take, but in what we build. And not in the speed of our success, but in the sustainability of our efforts and the integrity of our journey. The end.